Hazard, spelled HAZARD, is a show about how to prepare, prevent, and prevail over disaster. And it's hosted by me, a comedian. So get ready to be flooded with puns. I'm gonna hit you with a tsunami of jokes. There'll be no sandbagging. We're gonna turn the tide on this topic. Too much? All right, I'm not trying to cause any waves. Sorry, let's get started. What kind of person are you? Are you an X? Maybe an A or a V? If you own real property, this letter matters. It describes your flood risk. All property owners have some risk, but understanding your risk of flooding can be complicated. Today, I'm going to let you in on some tricks for protecting your property, even if you're a V. So what the flood is up with all these letters? Stay tuned, I'll tell you. You A's and V's out there, listen up. You have a high risk of flooding, but you X's and B's don't think you're high and dry. FEMA calls flood the most common natural disaster in America, with flooding occurring in every state. More than 20% of flood claims come from outside high-risk flood zones. Just 1 inch of flooding in your home can cost thousands of dollars. Often people without insurance cannot cover these costs. All these letters correspond to parts of a special map that, through FEMA, our government has laid out specifically to identify flood risk. Your zone designation is part of an equation that determines your relative insurance rates. X zones are the area of this flood insurance rate map, or FIRM, that FEMA designated as minimal to moderate flood risk areas. X zone, that sounds like a dating app for divorced people. The unshaded X, or minimal flood hazard zone, is not regulated. Land in this area may flood in extreme events. The shaded X represents areas with a slightly higher chance of annual flooding. FEMA considers this a moderate risk, and communities may not want to build critical facilities like schools and hospitals in this area. FEMA further divides the map with A and V zones, which are considered special flood hazard areas. A zones have risks of flood from rivers, streams, or other nearby water, which may or may not be defined. You know, before this, A zone was what I called the auto zone when I was in a hurry. I'm going to the A zone. I'm learning so much. V zones are coastal and the most perilous due to hazardous wave action. Think beachfront homes and businesses. So I met this A zone girl and she was like, "Oh, you're just an X zone?" I said, "Well, I'm kind of a shady X. I can't help it. I don't have that A zone money. But I know one thing, my V zone friend has been living on my couch since Hurricane Dorian, so don't knock it." Property in A and V zones include land that is below the base flood elevation. All homeowners with houses in A and V zones must have insurance if the property is under a federally backed mortgage. How high the building is built above the BFE will determine the cost of the premium. BFE, base flood elevation, that's not what I thought that stood for. And then there are the B, AO, AH, VE zones, and many others. Okay, so I know. What the flood, right?
FEMA has identified a whole range of different flood zones that categorize different areas based on the level of hazard in terms of flooding. V zones are the highest hazard flood zones because we are expecting to see wave action in those flood zones. From the V zones, we tend to move inland into A zones, which are also high hazard flood zones, but lower wave heights. We progress from A zones to X zones, which still may see flooding, but not expected to see as significant a flooding or see wave action in X zones.
All of those letters essentially just mean what FEMA determines where your likely highest flood elevation would be. Specifically on Folly Beach, most of the island is an AE15, which means that your flood zone is at a 15-foot elevation. So you want your property built at least 15 feet up, which just ensures that any structure that you build on that property is less likely to flood. Essentially, what that means for the islands is that you're building things and you're growing the island up and away from where any flooding is going to happen.
The gist is you need to know your flood zone so you can properly prepare for flood disaster. Knowing your flood zone can also determine whether you qualify for discounts or other cost-saving assistance. So what letter are you? We'll show you how to find out. Stick with us. This is Hazard.
How can I tell if a home is flooded before? Some states require sellers to disclose past flooding, flood zones, and other flood risk information to buyers. Read this information closely, but also do more research on your own. For instance, you can call the local floodplain official and ask if they are aware of any past flooding in the area. We also recommend that you request a home's National Flood Insurance Program flood loss history from the seller before you close on a home. NFIP flood claims stay with the structure's address, and multiple claims can lead to higher flood insurance rates. Only the owner can call the NFIP to request the flood loss history. They can call 877 FEMA MAP, and the flood loss history can be mailed or emailed to the owner.
This barricade is here for a reason. This barricade is here because what's behind it will kill you. Barricades, don't move them, don't drive around them, don't die. Turn around, don't drown.
Almost half of all flash flood deaths happen in vehicles. When in your car, look out for flooding in low-lying areas, at bridges, and at highway dips. As little as 6 inches of water may cause you to lose control of your vehicle. As the storm nears, be vigilant. Follow directions of local officials and know where to shelter if needed. Stay where you are if that is safer, or move to a local shelter. Visit ready.gov for tips to prepare to protect yourself and others.
What the flood? How you guys doing? Hey, welcome. Good to see you guys. Thanks for coming out. So what is it with all the letters about the flood zones? How can a simple guy like me understand this? It's like you got to have a PhD to know if you're an A, X, or V. You know what? They could have just named it little splash zone, medium splash zone, big splash zone. That would have been easy, but no, it had to be so complicated. Okay, so A, V, X, B, all of these flood zones are laid out on FEMA's Flood Insurance Rate Map, FIRM. The map is used to regulate construction in a floodplain and to determine flood insurance and relief guidelines. FIRMs are a product of the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP. You know, FEMA is so good at maps, they should be called FEMAPs. The National Flood Insurance Act of 1968 officially established a new way of looking at America's old flood problem. Congressional flood management dates to early 19th century. Much of the legislation involved trying to block or reroute waters to protect property and commerce. Over time, though, the responsibility of government and the regulations surrounding it changed. By the 1960s, a series of very expensive national disasters made clear the need for a new approach. At this time, floods were viewed as an uninsurable risk. Disaster victims relied heavily on federal assistance. The National Flood Insurance Act, passed in 1968, and the National Flood Insurance Program was born. The original NFIP established three main objectives. It made insurance available and affordable, it mandated the creation of the firms, and it established minimum standards for floodplain management required for communities to be eligible for federal insurance money. The legislation had limitations. Owners of existing homes and businesses did not have to immediately rebuild to the new standards, leaving them susceptible to flood disaster. Over the next several decades, NFIP struggled with participation and coverage. The costs and consequences of flooding continue to increase. As it was, NFIP was unaffordable and unsustainable. Above all, leaders recognized the need to help property owners who had filed multiple insurance claims for $1,000 or more. These properties are referred to as repetitive loss properties. Equally important, policyholders needed incentives to be proactive in preventing hazardous flooding. So in 2004, Congress passed the Flood Insurance Act. This act allowed communities to receive funding to relocate, demolish, or floodproof repetitive loss properties. To qualify for the Severe Repetitive Loss Grant Program, communities must participate in the NFIP and agree to adopt and enforce floodplain management ordinances. And they must have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan. The Act also allowed for minor localized flood reduction projects like raising road heights, increasing ditch sizes, or reclaiming land as open space for floodwaters. Funding also covered the dry floodproofing for historic properties. In historic cities like Charleston, South Carolina, the dry floodproofing technique is a valuable tool for flood prevention. Dry floodproofing keeps water out using sealants, pumps, walls, dams, or other methods to make the building effectively watertight. This type of flood prevention, when correctly used, can maintain historic integrity, both as a matter of design and by avoiding future flood hazards. But the Flood Insurance Act of 2004 did not address the program's money problem. The rate structure of NFIP still did not reflect the true risks and costs of flooding because too many rates were subsidized, 20% in fact. Also, costly flood events continue to occur at increasing rates. NFIP was spending more than it took in with premiums. Spending more than it took in. Sounds like my wife. The Biggert-Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 restructured NFIP again by eliminating subsidies and raising insurance rates to better reflect the real risk of flooding. This law would slowly phase out subsidies, and new subsidies would only be offered for properties in special flood hazard areas. The vast majority of the remaining 80% of policyholders who already paid full risk premiums would pay more, a new 5% charge to cover the reserve fund assessment. The reserve fund would help cover costs when claims exceeded the annual premium collected by the NFIP. Many believed the premium increase of Biggert-Waters was unaffordable. In just a couple years, Congress again reformed NFIP with the Homeowner Flood Insurance Availability Act of 2014. This act slowed the elimination of subsidies to alleviate citizens' affordability concerns, shifting the cost back to the government. It also required FEMA to consider flood prevention upgrades on the property when estimating premium rates. So, to bring it all back around, all of these acts and amendments, rules and regulations relate back to the firms. Your zone letter basically tells you what rules and premiums and surcharges apply to you. You can lower your rate by modifying your home to be more resistant to flood disaster. And all of this is most relevant if your community participates in the NFIP. I know it sounds complicated. There's a lot of budgetary concerns about floodgetary concerns. But remember, the NFIP helps people who need flood insurance get it when they otherwise could not. But only if your community participates in the program. When we come back, how to identify your zone and find out if NFIP is an option for you.
you asked. A recent map change moved me out of a high-risk flood area, so now I don't need flood insurance, right? Wrong. Flooding can and does happen in any flood zone, and homeowners and renters insurance doesn't cover damage from a flood. We recommend that you purchase flood insurance no matter your flood zone. Flood insurance may only be mandatory in the highest risk flood zone, but is highly recommended and very affordable in the moderate to low risk zones. Did you know almost 40% of the national flood insurance claims in the past 5 years come from moderate to low risk areas? Without flood insurance, you will likely have to take out a loan and make repairs and replace your items. Contact your insurance agent today for a quote on a flood insurance policy that you can afford.
See on page 4 that the projections need to be flood next Thursday?
Seriously? Thursday? Can't do that.
This is really inconvenient.
I have yoga that day.
I have no time for this.
So.
I can't do Thursday, but I can do Friday.
Disasters don't plan ahead. You can. Talk to your loved ones about how you're going to be ready in an emergency. Don't wait. Communicate.
I've been trying to come up with a way to keep all these flood zones straight. Think of it like this. X marks the spot for the areas with the least risk of flooding. V is for coastal areas with big waves. Hear the V? Hear the V right there? And A is for the areas with rivers. All right, I'm not helping. You know what? Just check the map. It makes it all very clear. Finally, the time has come, and I know you just can't wait to find out which letter are you. FEMA publishes the firms online at floodsmart.gov. You can go there and download your map. Some locations even include an interactive flood map. All you have to do is type in your address. You know, I went to the FloodSmart website. Turns out it's Flood Smart, not FloodSmart. You can't buy floods there. Flood maps change as flood risk changes. Map makers must consider new construction, erosion, and weather events to assess if a hazard has improved or degraded. When you search for your flood map, also check to see if you have a pending flood map, which may mean a new map will be released soon. A change in your flood zone could mean a change in your insurance requirements. Depending on your situation, you may be eligible for cost savings. You can also visit your town or city hall or ask your realtor or insurance agent to help you identify your flood zone. Communities must take action to participate in the NFIP. Individuals cannot buy NFIP otherwise. To have the benefit of NFIP for the entire community, leaders must formally express their intent to participate and adopt an ordinance that meets or exceeds the minimum NFIP criteria using the most up-to-date flood map. New construction or substantial improvement projects must follow best practices for floodplain management. Communities must also maintain a log of elevations to ensure all buildings are properly elevated and compliant with NFIP requirements. Now you know your letter and you know your risk. How do you get an NFIP policy? Remember, everyone has risk. All property owners, including those in low-risk areas, should have flood insurance if they cannot afford to repair substantial damage. FEMA keeps a community status book for NFIP at floodsmart.gov. You can go there to see if your town makes the list. You cannot buy directly from NFIP, but a qualified insurance agent can help you purchase. That person can also help you obtain an elevation certificate for your property. This form gives you a more precise view from an insurance standpoint of your flood risk. The elevation certificate must be completed by a land surveyor, engineer, architect, or community official who is authorized by law to certify elevation information. Congress must review and reauthorize NFIP periodically to ensure the program is sustainable and meeting goals. Better floodplain management practices encouraged by the NFIP have now made the market more attractive to private insurers, so there are more choices than ever. Next, what can you do to get the best rate for your coverage? Stick with us. This is Hazard.
Many lenders will require certain properties to carry flood insurance. If your property is in a V zone or an A zone and you have a mortgage, you will be required to carry flood insurance. The elevation certificate will inform the premium that you pay for your property. If your lowest floor is above the base flood elevation, then your insurance premium is going to be lower. If your lowest floor is below the base flood elevation, then your insurance premium is going to be higher. It's really important to go over the elevation certificate with the surveyor or engineer who filled it out, because a very minor mistake or a typo on the elevation certificate could create a very different insurance policy situation for you.
Insurance premiums are not only tied to risk, the value of the property also has major influence. NFIP could be the best rate option for you, but it's not the only option. So make sure to do your homework. There are several things you can do to help bring down the cost of insurance, no matter the provider. First, get to work and flood-proof your property, at least as much as possible. If done right, this can help reduce loss due to flooding. Then, make sure to get that elevation certificate to your agent when shopping for insurance. It clarifies your risk based on the unique qualities of your property instead of relying solely on your zone designation. Without an elevation certificate, you could be leaving money on the table. Also, find out if your municipality participates in the community rating system, which awards incentives for local floodplain management activities that exceed NFIP's minimum standard. The community rating system is optional for all NFIP members, but most communities do take this extra step to protect floodplains. When using a private insurer, firm maps, the rating system, and your elevation certificate can still impact your premium. Private markets are good for risky properties that the NFIP won't cover, like those built in coastal barriers or completely over water. You can also use private insurers for extra coverage if you want a higher maximum limit than what NFIP offers. But keep this all in perspective. Just because you live in an A or V zone doesn't mean you need to start gathering 2 of every animal. These are the things you can do to make sure you're prepared. Today's NFIP holds over 5 million flood insurance policies, collecting $4.75 billion in premiums and surcharges. NFIP will continue to change as stipulated by the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act. Some policies will increase, but there may also be cost-saving opportunities. Be on the lookout for a new firm rating system that is expected to be announced in 2021. The new system, dubbed Risk Rating 2.0, will use new technology and best practices to deliver rates that are more individualized and better reflect a property's unique flood risk. Continued reauthorization of NFIP by Congress indicates leaders see a necessity for the program, especially in the goals of floodplain management and incentivizing flood prevention. But NFIP is still an imposing burden on the American taxpayer. Further, premiums will continue to increase until the program is solvent, which could make it less attractive to some insurance buyers. Discussion now focuses on the goal to share the risk between NFIP and private insurers. Using this strategy, FEMA would like to see flood insurance coverage doubled by 2023. So will the NFIP ever go away? Yeah, it was a rhetorical question. I have no idea. But I do know flooding will happen in some form near you. It's just a matter of when. Flood risk changes as our floodplains change, whether naturally or due to man-made causes. It is important that you consistently reevaluate your exposure. Know your zone and consider obtaining flood insurance, even if you're a shady ex like me. And the next time that A-zone girl is like, "What the flood?" you can be like, "I know my zone and you ain't in it." Don't forget, you can go to floodsmart.gov to learn more. Thanks for watching. This is Hazard. The Biggert Waters Act was co-authored by Maxine Waters. And who would know more about flooding than Max Waters? I think she beat out Mo Dryer for that job. Flood insurance has more acts than a Shakespeare play. Repetitive loss. That's easy to remember. That's what they used to call me in my coaching days. All right, you guys, I'm Keith D. Thank you, Queen Street Playhouse. Thanks for coming out. What the flood?